Something interesting, I want to start with something that happened to me, and I just can't believe that it's almost 20 years ago to the day. Almost 20 years ago, I was pastor of a church, and I had led the church a little bit recklessly financially into a big decision. And right after the financial decision was made, our income really went down, and as a church, we couldn't pay our bills. And the only way to balance the budget was with salary. And so, since I had led the decision, I felt like the only fair thing was for me to take the biggest pay cut. And I took a pay cut that I knew I could not live on. I knew my budget wouldn't work on it. So that was a little scary. It's like, I know I can't live on the amount that I'm about to be paid, but also I felt responsible because I had led the decision. So I did something for the first time in my life. If some of you know that I journal all the time. I always have notebooks. This is the actual notebook from that time. This is what my notebooks look like when they're done. I mean, this, like when I use them. I write things that I learned from God. When I learn something from my Bible, I write it in here. This is where I write down my prayer requests. And because I was really like, I don't know how I'm going to make it. I knew when you're in a spot where you don't know how you're going to make it and the only solution is God, you really depend. Oftentimes that's when you trust in God. And so I didn't know how to do it. And so I opened a blank page. This was the page. And at the top, I wrote provider. So that's one of the things that God has promised, is that he'll be your provider in life. I also wrote things in here like protector and comforter, and I can't read that word, corrector. So my handwriting is almost the best. So I know that he wants to work in my life somehow through this really difficult time. I just had no idea what was going to happen. But I was convinced that God would show up in some way, and so I started a blank page. And at the top, like I said, it said provider. It's like, well, you promised that you're going to take care of all my needs. Did you know that's a promise in the Bible? One of his many promises. He promises that if you will trust him, he'll take care of your needs. If you don't trust him, then figure it out yourself. But if you will trust him, he will meet your needs. And so I just wrote this. Again, I'd never done it before. I had no idea what he was going to do, but I had confidence and faith that he would do something. And then all of a sudden things started happening. So unexpectedly, and a lot of these people had no idea what was going on in my life, I started to be given things. Some people gave me money. One of my friends gave me from another place, another state, gave me some money. They didn't know what was going on. And then we started getting gifts and things, and I just wrote every single thing down, including the value of it, in this time period when my salary was cut and I couldn't make it without God. And eventually, my salary was restored, and when I added this whole section up, look at my little chicken scratch. When I added this whole section up, God had given back more than I'd given up. And my faith grew so much. I don't doubt that my God will provide and fulfill his promise to meet all my needs, because I literally have been in a spot where I could not take care of my needs, and I trusted God, and he came through. So that's why I encourage you to write things down, because I have a written record of every single thing that happened during that time. This is what our God has promised. Our God has promised. I'm not the only one in history who's experienced this. Plenty of people, some of you have experienced the God who provides, the God who guides, the God who takes care of your life. And he says that the key to the whole thing, according to the Bible, is this: without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and he rewards those who earnestly seek him. It's one of my favorite promises in the Bible. So look at this. If you don't have faith in God, then you will never experience God. He doesn't say it's difficult to experience God. If you have no faith, he says it's impossible. So if you want to live this life as if there is no God, then don't ever focus on your faith, and you will never, ever, ever experience God in this world. You'll just coast through the world like so many Americans do, just living for money, living for relationship, living for whatever comes next. Your next accomplishment, your next high, whatever that is, right? That's how Americans are living right now. Because you only experience God with faith, and without faith, it is not difficult, it is impossible. You'll never, never know him. But the good thing is, look at what he says. The two aspects of faith that we have to believe that he exists. If I were to ask you, how many of you believe that God exists? The bulk of you would say, yeah, right? The bulk of Americans, like last I saw, 90% of Americans believe that he exists. Okay, you're halfway there. But that's not the only part of what he says you have to experience him. Look at the last part. You have to believe that he rewards those who seek him. So you have to start seeking him, and then he promises that if I believe that he is real, and I believe that if I seek him, I get the reward. And don't screw this up, because I did this wrong once. I thought the reward was success, right? That's what I thought the reward was. If I seek him, he's going to be the reward. And the reward is the American dream. It's success in my career. It's success in this field. It's financial success. No, the reward is not some materialistic American dream. The reward is God himself. He's the treasure in this world. You get God. You get God doing things in your life that you could never do. Moving obstacles out of your way, opening doors for you, providing for you. You experience his love. You experience joy and peace and contentment. He's the reward, not what he can give you. And so he says, here you just got to believe this, that if I seek him, he'll reward me, and he's the reward. More of God in my life. More, and that is just the greatest thrill there is. When God shows up, I mean, do you have any idea how amazing this feels to go through? When you have experienced God in your life. I mean, that's the reward. God is the reward himself, not what he can give you. That's not the reward. The fact that he showed that unbelievable kindness to me, that's the reward. So this is what he says. It's all about faith. It's all about building our faith. So what is faith? Well, I love this definition. An author named Jim Cymbala said, total dependence on God that becomes supernatural in its working. So our part is to depend on him. And then his part is he does supernatural things in our life. If all of your life is just natural, then that's just you. And we settle for natural all the time. But he wants to do something supernatural in your life. I mean, it's the story of the Bible. I mean, that is a supernatural experience. He wants you to have those kind of experiences. And it's all conditioned upon faith and that learning to totally depend upon God. That's the goal. And the good thing is, some of you are like, well, geez, Brian, I don't have that kind of faith. Well, Jesus was so clear about this. He's like, hey, it doesn't take huge faith. Jesus said, that's a mustard seed. He said, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, that's all you need. You just need a speck of faith. And then he said, what will happen in your life is you will literally see mountains move. Now, if I gave you a shovel, do you think in your lifetime you could move that mountain? In your lifetime, could you tackle that? Could you move it? Not in my lifetime. Not in 50 lifetimes could I move that mountain. Can God move that mountain? He made the mountain. That's nothing to him. And we twist this around. We think if I have faith the size of a mountain, I can move mustard seeds. No, it's if I have faith the size of mustard seed, mountains will move. And how many of us don't have mountains in our life that we need moved, right? Broken relationships. Long-lasting problems in our life, addictions, financial issues, opposition that we're facing from people, right? We have mountains. And you got two ways to approach the mountains. You get a shovel and start digging, or you put the shovel down and trust him, and as you depend on him, he clears the way for you. One is natural, one is supernatural. Make no mistake about it, Jesus is inviting you into a supernatural life, and that's what this brand new series is all about, what I'm so excited to talk to you about. We're calling it Unsinkable, and it's really about building a faith that cannot be sunk. No matter what you go through, no matter what we experience, this faith preserves and endures. And so what we're going to talk about in this series is really about building that kind of great faith that allows us to experience God and the supernatural. And we're starting with this question. We're going to tackle this for this week and for sure next week, maybe a third. And we're going to talk about how do I build my faith? Because some of you are like, I don't feel like I have mustard seed faith. Great. There are things you can do that will build your faith, and we're going to talk about them. So I want to ask you to open up your program. Inside you got these notes. Would you grab your notes? Grab a pen, something you write with. If you're watching online, if you're not on our website, go to our website, PennyOldChurchLife.com, and you can grab the notes right from there for free. So great subject to talk about. Let's jump into this. Number one, if you want to build your faith, you have to learn how to endure when it's hard. The first thing is I have to endure when it's hard. When things get difficult, I got to keep going. In my lifetime, I've noticed there are two things that are really, really, really damaging to my faith. The first one is this, when I'm comfortable. When things are going really good, that's bad for my faith. That's sad to say, right? You would think that it would create incredible gratitude inside of us. You know what it does? It creates incredible complacency with our spiritual life. Do you know the story of what happens when they send people into outer space with astronauts? You know what happens to their bones and their muscles? You know what happens? They deteriorate. Yep, they fall apart because there's no stress. And so they literally have to exercise in outer space to keep any kind of muscle tone at all, because without any stress at all, it all falls apart. And that's a good picture of what happens to us spiritually. When things are too comfortable for us, we fall apart. There are plenty of people who are Christians who say they follow Jesus, but they're not following today because things are really going good in their life. And they don't need God. Because, after all, I got money, I got a good job, things are going well, I got my health, things are good in my family. I don't need God. And what I always say to them is like, well, where did all that come from? It all comes from God. So, it's unfortunate. It's true in my life too. When things get too comfortable, we become a little complacent about spiritual things. We don't think we need him anymore. But the other thing that is just as dangerous is when we really get hurt. That's really dangerous to faith. Because when we get hurt, then too many times we don't know how to handle the hurt well, and we often make decisions that are bad for our faith. I don't know if you've ever heard of this guy. His name is Toby Mac. Very, very popular and famous Christian singer. He's made lots and lots and lots of songs over the years. Really, really some good music. This is a picture of him with his son. His son's name was Truett. And Truett wanted to break into the music industry. And so obviously when your dad's Toby Mac, you got an advantage. And so Toby was mentoring his son, of course, and they had this really great experience. And not long after Truett's first big show, his first concert, Toby Mac got the phone call that his son Truett was dead. He died of an accidental drug overdose. His dad didn't even know that he had used drugs. Toby and his wife were devastated. But shortly after they found out about his death, they released this statement. They said, we don't follow God because we have some sort of under-the-table deal with him, like, we'll follow you if you bless us. By the way, lots of Christians do. Lots of Christians do. I will follow you if you keep my marriage alive. I will follow you if you keep me in this job. I will follow you if you give me more success. I will follow you if. And then the moment that's gone, plenty of people walk away. It is an under-the-table deal. It's like, I'm only your follower as long as these conditions happen in my life. And if you ever drop the ball, then I'm out of here. So Toby Mac said, that's not the deal we have. We follow God because we love him. And it's our honor, and he is the God of the hills and the valleys, and he is beautiful above all things. Can you imagine writing that statement days after the death of your son? It's just incredible faith, right? The interesting thing is how God works. Toby Mac is a huge golfer, loves golfing. And shortly before his son died, this guy who loves Toby Mac's music invited him to go golfing with him. And so Toby Mac said, sure, love that. So they went out golfing together. And as he was golfing with this guy shared a story. It turns out that this guy had just lost his son a short time ago to a car accident. Look how God does this, right? So Toby Mac was golfing with him, hearing this guy talk about the pain of losing his son. And Toby Mac was really curious about it, and the guy said, when you go through something hard, you have to grab onto something that you can trust. And he said, you have to grab onto the promises of God. And so Toby Mac's golfing with this guy, listening to tell his story of how he made it through the death of his son with his faith intact by knowing and clinging to the promises of God. And a short time later, his son dies. When that man heard about it, he immediately called him back up again and said, hey, talk about wanting to talk to somebody who knows what you're in the middle of. He knew. And he said, listen, it is about those promises. And he warned him. He said, don't focus on a promise that God hasn't made, because we do this as American Christians all the time. God has promised to make me rich. No, he hasn't. Sorry. God has promised that I will never have problems. No. Jesus specifically said the opposite. He said, in this world you'll have trouble. We get all these crazy Americanized ideas in our Christianity, and then when things go bad, we think, oh my goodness, God's dropped the ball because something bad just happened to me. Well, I'm sorry, where's the promise that nothing bad will happen to you? Quite the opposite. In this world, you will have trouble. But you know what he has promised? He has promised that he will be with you, and he will sustain you, and he will provide for you, and he will guide you, and he will care for you. Those are the promises. And Toby Mack said, that's what I held on to. And listen to this. And I found God there, or he found me there. And the kindness of God in the middle of that sustained Toby Mack. So I've learned a lot about this. I've learned a lot about enduring in my faith when it's hard. Here's the thing that really holds me. I have learned that I believe that my pain has a purpose. I believe that. I believe my pain always has a purpose. My life was forever reshaped by some verses I memorized years ago from the book of Hebrews, and when I read them, I knew how significant they were. I journaled about them for days. I've taught on them many times since learning these verses years ago. I want to share them with you today. These are the verses that help me endure. And look at the first word is endure, right? Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as sons, for what son is not disciplined by his father? Now, it's really careful. If you mishear me right here, you're going to be mad at God. And please don't mishear me. Listen to what he says. He says, I want you to endure difficult things, hard things, and the key word there is as. It's like as if it was discipline from your Father in heaven. He doesn't say it is, and that's really important. In other words, God didn't kill Toby Mack's son to discipline Toby Mack, okay? Because Christians say this all the time. I know I'm going through this bad thing because I did something wrong and God is disciplining me. They just suffered because of me. It's my fault. And that is not what the Bible says. That's not it. But he said, I want you to learn to view difficult things in your life, hard things in your life, as if it was discipline. And he said, what son's not disciplined by his father? Unfortunately, in America, we have lots of examples of that, right? Where dads and moms don't discipline their kids. How do those kids turn out? You love being around them, right? You just wish you could spend more time with those kids, right? Right. No, not at all. If you love your kids, you discipline them. It's out of love that you discipline them. You're going to have a timeout for the next 10 minutes, or no TV time tonight, or no electronic time tonight, because you don't say things like that to people, right? Because you want their life to be better. That's why you discipline them. And he says, so that's what discipline is about. It's about corrective behavior, right? And he said, I want you to learn to view everything hard in your life as if it was, not that it is, as if it was discipline from the Father in heaven. And he says this, no discipline is pleasant at the time, and there's that word, painful, because some of you're in pain today. But then he says, if you endure that, later on, it will produce a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who've been trained by it. So look at what you get. He says that in his hands, our painful experiences can actually be something that change us. They can transform us so that I am more of a righteous person. In other words, my life is more in line with Jesus. And I can have supernatural peace no matter what I go through. This is what he's offering us. God doesn't cause the pain in my life, but God always, always, always is willing to use the pain in my life to transform me if I bring the right attitude. That's why he says, I want you to endure it as if it was discipline. So you get to choose that. And this promise has changed my whole perspective on painful things when they happen to me. And I'm not alone with that. This man's name is William Carey. He was a famous missionary to India in the 17 and 1800s. One time he was building a printing press because he wanted to actually be able to print Bibles in the Indian language for them to be able to distribute. And so he had this printing press, he had the work being done, and then a fire happened, and the whole thing was destroyed. Now, how might you be tempted to respond in that moment? What might you be saying? It's like, might you not be like, God, what the heck? Whose side are you on? I'm trying to print Bibles here. You let this burn down, right? I mean, might there not be a little bit of complaining or anger at God, right? That's pretty normal. And yet, look at how William Carey responded. I love this. He said, how unsearchable are God's ways. The Lord let this happen that I might trust him more. I will be still and know that he is God. Wow. Would that be your response if something bad happened to you today? And listen to the faith of that. It's just what Hebrews said. I want you to endure discipline as if it was painful things, as if they were discipline from the hand of a God who loves you. And the most important thing, by the way, when news got back to England and the churches that were supporting William Carey, they rallied around him like they never had before. They sent so much support back to him that he actually later said, the profit from the fire in the end was far greater than the loss. Thank God my stuff burned down. Right? Isn't that amazing? That's God. And anyone who will demonstrate any amount of faith in the middle of any adversity gets God. But without faith, is it difficult to please God? No, it is impossible. And you will never know God. And you will never experience God without faith. Because if he just starts showing up in your life supernaturally, who's going to take all the credit for that? Well, I am. I just did that. I mean, I'm just amazing. That's how come I have such a great career. That's how come I have such great resources. That's how come I'm just me, right? And we'll take all the credit for it, and we will never grow closer to him. But he will respond to faith anytime he sees it, and painful times are the best times to demonstrate faith to God. So the key question is not, God, why did this happen? Why did you let this happen to me? Here's the key question. Here's the prayer to pray. God, is there something you want me to learn from this? And it's on your notes. Is there something you want me to learn from this, right? Because when you're being disciplined, isn't that the point? Discipline is about correction. And God says, if you will approach your painful things with this mindset, not that God is disciplining you, but you'll approach it this way, then every painful experience you go through becomes an opportunity to connect deeper with God and learn from him. Here's what I believe. God never wastes a painful experience. Even the ones we bring on ourselves, he is fully willing to be more involved in our lives. Does it take any faith to pray that? It takes some faith. And the good news is, when you move out in faith, you experience God. So that's the first thing. I endure when it's hard because I believe my pain has a purpose, and this is my prayer. God, is there something you want me to learn from this? Second thing, and this is the big one, the only other one we're going to cover today. If you want to demonstrate faith, build your faith, then you have to learn this. I have to learn how to give thanks in good and bad times. You got to learn this one. It's interesting to me how many Christians, the hardest part about following Jesus for them, the only real decision about following Jesus is, do they get up and go to church that day? And that's it. That's the biggest decision. If that's your biggest decision, you're not following him. Because following Jesus requires some sacrifice and commitment. And he asks for some big things. Want to see one of the biggest he's ever asked for? Look at this. Be thankful in all circumstances. This is God's will for you who belong to Christ Jesus. So on the way home, your engine blows, you pull over, you're on the side of the road, it's totally dead, you got to pay for it to get towed, you got to pay for a replacement, you don't have the money for it. His first response is, what he wants you to develop is this faith reaction that says, God, I have no idea why I'm thanking you for this, but this happened for a reason, and you are already at work, so thank you. Right? Just how we always respond. Right? No, we don't respond that way. But that is the command. So again, is following Jesus always easy? Is it easy? It isn't easy. And if you're following Jesus is easy, you're not following him. Because he says, I want you to learn how to give thanks even in the difficult times. And it takes real faith to do this. You have to believe some things. So I work really hard on this one because I believe something. Here's what I believe. I believe that God will bring good from everything. That's why I give thanks when things go bad, because I believe that God will bring good from everything. And I believe it because in the Bible, he repeatedly promises it. Here's one of the examples. We know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him. So he doesn't say that everything happening in your life right now is good. He doesn't say that, right? Because it's not all good. But he says that he will, look at the word again, all the things in your life. Do you think all the things in your life includes only the good things in your life, or also even the bad and difficult and challenging things in your life? What do you think all covers? Well, it covers everything, right? In everything that happens in your life, here's the promise of God, that our God, and he, look at that word works. Matter of fact, if you're following on your notes, circle and star the word works. God works. God works. That's what I want you to understand. He is at work. That's what I want you to understand, is that God works. God is working today, and he's working in your life. And so I believe that no matter what I go through, God is already at work in it, and he's going to bring good out of it. Here's what I believe. 3 things, and I don't have these down. If you want to write them on your notes, I think they're really critical theologically to understand about the new relationship God offers you at the moment you put your faith in his son, Jesus. At the moment you put your faith in him, he loves you. He loves everybody anyway. But now here's where it gets different. He is now for you, not against you. Doesn't matter what your past is, doesn't matter what your present is, doesn't matter what your future is. The moment you put your faith in Jesus, you are united to Jesus, and God sees you connected to his son, and so he is for you. He is never against you. He will never be against you. Theologically, you cannot be moved from that position. And on top of that, here's the other promise. It's right there in that verse. He is always at work in my life. So somebody once told me something I found so convicting. They said, at any point in your life, God is always at work in about 100 different areas of your life. And maybe you know of 1 or 2 or 3. I want to ask you, if I were to say, write down the areas in your life where God is really at work today, what would you write down? Can you think of any area of your life where God is at work? Many, many Christians would have nothing to write down. Okay, then we have 2 possibilities. God is a liar, or we need to develop some more spiritual discernment to be able to spot where God is working so we can join him. I know he's not a liar. God is at work in your life today. Do you know that? He is working in your life behind the scenes right now. I'm going to give you an example of this. I was reading a while ago in the book of Psalms, and I came across a great story. If you know the first part of the Bible, the Old Testament, God had rescued the nation of Israel from slavery in Egypt. And he'd brought them to the land that he was going to give them. He called it their promised land. But in order to get there, they had to travel. It's not like they were traveling through open fields where nobody lived. Oh no, they had to travel through kingdoms. So it'd be like this. If Canada decided to move as a nation to Mexico and they had to pass through America, right? So all of a sudden the whole nation is walking down through America to get to Mexico. Wouldn't that create some feelings, right, in a lot of people? Well, that's what it was like. This whole nation was walking through all these other nations to get to where God had said they were going to go, and it created tremendous fear in those nations. And normally what they would have done is just attacked. They'd have just attacked. It's like, you can't come across our borders. And here's the behind the scenes what was happening. So in Psalm 105, you read this. It said they wandered from nation to nation, from one kingdom to another. So they just kept going from one kingdom to the next kingdom, to the next kingdom. And those kingdoms had kings, and they had walled cities, and they had armies and chariots and swords, and they were afraid of a nation invading them, right? And here's what happened. Nobody attacked them. And do you know why? You know, as Israelites, they had no idea why no one's attacking them. But here's what behind the scenes happened. God allowed no one to oppress them. For their sake, he rebuked kings. He said, do not touch my anointed ones and do my prophets no harm. So somehow, God cleared the way. He went to each of those kings, either in a vision or a dream, or he sent a prophet, and he warned them in such a way that they knew they'd been warned by God. And he said, don't you touch my people. You touch my people? Oh man, you touch my people, and you and I are going to have issues. And they were so afraid of God that they're like, oh, okay. And nobody attacked them. Now, from the Israelites, God didn't tell them what he was doing. From the Israelites' perspective, it felt like this, right? They're just walking among all these powerful nations who at any moment can pounce upon them and destroy them. You know, from their perspective, it's fear, but did they have anything to be afraid of? I mean, serious question. Did they actually have anything to be afraid of? Actually, in reality, no. Because the greatest being in existence, God Almighty, was standing there like a wall between them and everyone who would want to oppress them. And there's no one stronger than him. None. I mean, he could have just gone and squished them like bugs. He's so powerful. No one gets through him. No one. So the reality is, even though they felt like they were in danger, the reality is they were in zero danger, right? Zero. Because God is greater than every single one of those kingdoms. And that's what happens in your life and my life all the time. We feel like this. It's like, I'm so vulnerable. it's scary right now because things are going bad and things are wrong. And they don't like me and they're opposed to me and they want to get my job and on and on and on. And the reality is we only see from our perspective, but God has made these incredible promises. He says, I love you. And not only love you, I'm for you. And not only am I for you, I am always working in your life. Always. So even when something bad happens to you, I show up and I bring my strength and power into that to bring good out of it. It's not good what you go through, but I will always bring good out of it. So again and again and again, God is just saying to us, just trust me. Just trust me. I got you. I got you. I'm stronger, I'm bigger, and I'm for you. You don't need to be afraid. I'm working on your behalf. That's why we used to use this phrase all the time. We used to teach on it all the time called never judge in the middle. So you know what never judge in the middle means? It means when you go through something difficult, the beginning part is kind of like shock and awe. It's like, oh no, that just happened to me. And then the end is okay because you can see how it's going to end. But it's in the middle when you can't see what God is doing that we tend to struggle with our faith the most. It's in the middle that we tend to say, well, maybe God isn't going to help me. Maybe God isn't going to keep his promise. And God wants us to trust him in the middle. And I read a great example of this. In the early 1900s, there was a family in Scotland who wanted to come to America, start over, have a new life. Very common story, right, in the 1900s? So they had 9 kids. So it took them a long, long time to save the money to buy passage on a ship to bring their entire family to America. 1 week before the ship was to sail, one of their sons got bit by a dog. The doctor treated the bite and then hung up a yellow curtain outside their house indicating quarantine because they didn't know if the boy had rabies. There were no tests for it back in those days. There was nothing they could do. They had to just isolate the boy, and obviously if he showed signs of rabies, he's done. So they had to quarantine him. And his quarantine lasted 2 weeks. So 1 week before they were to sail, they had a choice. Do we sail and leave our son behind or cancel? The dad was livid with God. That's what we do. We're in the middle, right? Middle of something we don't understand, middle of something painful, and what do? We get mad at God. So common, so common, so common. He literally walked down to the docks and poured out his anger to God as he watched the ship sail away that day. Anyone recognize the ship? Maybe you'll recognize it more by the name. Yeah, he had passage on the Titanic. And a week later, when the news got back to Scotland what had happened, do you think he felt a little bit differently about God saying no to him? All of us, and that's what we do all the time in our lives. Something happens and our first reaction is, God hates me. Oh, you're just terrible. You took your eyes off me. You don't care. And he's just saying, would you trust me for a second? Just a second. Give me a second. I love you. I am for you, not against you. And by the way, I am incredibly strong and I'm always at work in your life. Watch what I can do in these circumstances to bring good out of this. Watch what I can do. And so faith, here's what faith sounds like. When you have something bad happen, God, I believe in you. You love me, you're for me, and you're working in this painful situation. So by faith, I thank you before I even see the good that you are bringing from this. If you thank him afterwards, like the man did in the Titanic story, that's called gratitude. If you thank him before, that's faith. And do you know what happens in your life when God hears that prayer? God's like, oh man, you just trusted me. And the moment you trust him with a mountain-sized faith, right? That's what you need? No, with a speck of faith, a mustard seed speck of faith, then you get God and you get to experience God and you will see supernatural things happen in your life because of God. That's the prayer to pray. It takes faith to pray that, right? So I've told you for years, one of these days I'm going to preach on how to handle it when you win the lottery. I can't wait to do that message. So, because you know what happened that week? Then I'll win the lottery. That's what will happen, because what often happens almost so many times is when I'm preaching about teaching on a subject like this, then I get to experience what I'm talking about. So last week, got hit in one of the hardest ways I have been hit in a long, long time. Nothing with my marriage, nothing with the church here, just something else that I can't talk about the details of. But I have not been this angry in a long, long time. And I'm not even standing here pretending like my anger has cooled down all that much yet. I am so hurt and so mad. And I was prepping this message. So I was actually incredibly grateful for this, because I immediately started practicing what I preach. I journaled about it like I do, fill those notebooks. I wrote, here's what happened, here's how I feel about it. And then I liked it when I really hurt like that, I write a section, I just title it Faith. Because I try and think, if I was going to trust God in the middle of this, what would I say? And thankfully I knew exactly what to say. So the first thing I wrote in that faith section was, thank you, God, that this just happened. And I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it. It took several times of writing it and saying it before I finally meant it. And for me, you ever heard the phrase, you ever heard this idea of planting your flag? I planted my flag on these truths this week. I stand here enduring, having no idea what's going to happen, what the future is, none. But I plant my flag on these truths. And every time that anger came back up, I went right back to these things and said, God, what do you want me to learn from it? Remember, because I endure hardship as if it was discipline from my God. And the most important thing in hardship is, what do you want me to learn? Or in discipline is, what do you want me to learn? So God, I've been praying, what do you want me to learn from this? And I feel like he's been just shouting some things that I needed to learn, that I would not have paid attention to if not for this pain this week. And then the other question is, hey God, thank you. Before I even see you working, thank you that this happened. Thank you that I know it doesn't in any way mean you love me less, and it doesn't compromise in any way your promise that you are already at work for good in this situation. And I have no idea what that is. None. That my story isn't very far, so I can't tell you the good that God is going to bring out of it. But you want me to tell you what's going to happen? The day is going to happen. And the day is going to come where I will stand here and say, hey, remember that when I told you about that? Here's the good that God brought out of it. I have zero doubt about that. None. It will happen. Because either God is truthful and he is working like he said, or he's a liar and we're all totally wasting our time here. I do not believe for a second that he is a liar. Every promise he has made you is true. And the day will come when I'll be able to say, oh boy, thank God for that moment. Thank God. And really feel it with all of my heart, like that man standing on the dock saying, oh boy, God, thanks. Thanks that we didn't get aboard that ship. That's what's going to happen. Here's what I want you to know. We've just started this subject of faith. Faith is everything. If you are tired of the natural life, trying to figure it out yourself, trying to make it all happen yourself, you're worn out, exhausted, then this series is for you. Because he wants to do more in your life if you'll just let him. And without faith, it's impossible. So I really want to encourage you to be part of this series and take some of these steps of faith. For some of you, you already know what you have to do. Those two prayers right there on your notes are what you need to start praying. Some of you have been really, really hurt, and you need to say to God, hey, thanks that this happened. I don't even know why I'm thanking you. But I know there's a purpose in it. And what do you want me to learn while I'm waiting? And those are the two faith prayers you pray this week. And I promise you, if you will pray in faith, you will experience God. I promise that. And I have zero concern about that at all, because he always responds to faith. And you will experience more of God. Let me have you bow your heads as we finish. all of this begins with a beginning step of faith. It's very common in our world for everybody to say, we're all sons and daughters of God. Well, it's a really nice sentiment, but it's not what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches that we are all loved by God, every single human being. We are treasured by God. And every human being on earth has the opportunity to be a part of God's family. But in the New Testament, it says you have to be adopted in. And that's when all the promises become yours, once you become a part of his family. And that happens through a simple step of faith. Like I told you, everything happens through faith. The Bible says that we could never make ourselves right with a holy and pure God, and so he gave his son 2,000 years ago for all of us. And with Jesus' death on the cross, the full payment for all the unloving things we have ever done was made, and we don't have to pay. He paid for us. And if you will ask this living God for forgiveness, then he will forgive you and put you in his family permanently, and then those promises become all yours. And if you want that, with your head bowed, you can say something like this to him. Say, Jesus, I'm turning to you today. I need you, and I know I need you. And I want to be a part of your family. Please put me in your family today as your son or daughter, as your child forever. I want these promises in my life. With your head bowed, again, some of you came in here with a lot of pain. Some of you, it's time to take a step of faith with the painful things you've been through and ask God one of those two questions. Some of you need to say to him, God, is there something you want me to learn from this? Because you've never asked him that. And he can use those things to make our character better. And for some of you, as hard as it is, you need to say, God, thank you for this. Not because it's good, because you are already at work in the middle of this to bring something good out of it. So before I even see what that is, thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. Now as we finish, maybe you ask Jesus to forgive you or recommitted your life. This is how you communicate with us as a church. Just take this little card out, and there's a couple of places you can check. If you have questions about this subject, I really encourage you to write them on here and let us know, and then drop it in one of the two offering boxes back on the back doors where you came in. Thanks so much for coming, and we will see you again next week as we continue this series.